Welcome to the Greatness Is Not Need Approval podcast, where I'm your host, James Epps Jr. And boy, am I excited to have my guest on today, Dr. Sheila, don't forget the D, Williams. But as always, before we get into Sheila's impactful story, I have a question for you, the audience. Do you know how great you are? Because you are great. So no matter if people doubt you, no matter if they don't believe in your dreams and your goals, no matter if they can't see your vision, always remember this: your greatness does not need anybody else's approval. Speaking of greatness, my guest, my friend, Dr. Sheila, don't forget the D, Williams. Can you introduce yourself to the people?
Oh my goodness, thank you. Well, my name is Dr. Sheila D. Williams. I am so excited to be here. I am an author. I am a mental health advocate, a coach, a John Maxwell certified speaker and trainer, and I am a child of God. So thank you for having me.
Amen. I didn't even know some of those things about you, but amen. So we want to welcome you on. And so thank you for taking the time out to be here, because I was trying to connect with this young lady right here. This young lady is moving and shaking. She is busy. So I'm glad that she made the time so she can share her experiences and her journey with us on the podcast. So speaking of your journey, let's talk about, we always got to begin where it all began. Can you talk about, because you didn't start out as the doctor,
No,
right?
no, I did not.
You had to start somewhere. So how was life for little Sheila growing up?
Ooh, that's a great question. So, like anybody else, what we have in our household is a norm for us because we don't know what's happening in the house next door or the house across the street. So, excuse me, I have a little bit of cold. But for me, I had loving parents. We were in a Christian household. I was the youngest of three children. I'm still the youngest of three children. So, yeah, it was a loving household, but it was a little different. And I didn't realize how different it was until I got older. But when I say it was different, my mother, she was sick. And we didn't know what her illness actually was because we kept taking her back and forth to the doctor. And her illness showed up as physical ailments. And so we kept taking her back and forth to the doctor to try to figure out what was wrong with her. But it was not until I was in my mid 20s that we realized what it really was. And it was actually diagnosed correctly. So the way that it showed up when I was younger as a kid, one day she would feel good. And then for 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks, she would not. She would at times not get out of bed or not, cook, or she didn't have very many friends. She didn't have a lot of social outings that she participated in. Sometimes she just wouldn't come out of the house at all for weeks or months at a time. So, a lot of times she would just be in bed. She would like the blinds in the home, the curtains closed. And I don't know if you could tell, but I was a little bit of an outgoing kid. So if you can imagine, that was a little bit challenging for me because I'm ready to turn the radio on and turn the TV up and have my friends over, and she was not really having that. So her illness, her physical ailments, is what the doctors would treat with muscle relaxers or some kind of pain pill or something, and it would send her home. So you're talking about, I don't want to age myself here, but this was in the 70s and the early 80s. So you took, if you were sick, you went to your primary care physician and they treated you for whatever ailment, whatever your symptoms were, and they sent you home. So little did I know until I was, again, in my mid 20s, that she really did not finally get her correct diagnosis, which was clinical depression.
And so you experiencing that as a kid, right? So you're not really understanding what's going on. Was there ever any time like that affected you, while you're going to school? Because you're just growing up and you're just trying to be a kid. So how was life like during that time as you just trying to be just a normal kid?
That's a great question. It was challenging at times because, growing up in an African American and a Black home, it's like, okay, whatever happens in the family kind of stays in the family. So we're not talking about like, okay, this is challenging. We don't know what's going on with mom. It's just like we dealing with it, right? And so my father, he was very active in the church. Again, we were in a Christian home, so we spent like a lot of time at church. Even if we weren't at church, he was at church. And then he also was the sole breadwinner in the home. My mother didn't work. And so between, working, I don't know, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, 7 days, basically like 6, 7 days a week. If he wasn't at work, he was at church. If he wasn't at church, then of course he's home, he take a shower, he go to bed, he eat, get up and go to work the next day. So he worked a lot in order to take care of, 3 kids and his wife, who had, again, back and forth to the doctor, a lot of medical stuff going on. But the way that it impacted me was, my friends would ask sometimes, like, well, where's your mama? And why does she participate in this? And where's your mama? Home, in bed. And I was often the one who was taking care of her and hurrying up to get home to look after her. So a lot of times I couldn't participate in activities because I had the responsibility of caring for my mother. Not only the responsibility of caring for her, being very independent to make sure that I cared for myself, because she couldn't do it at times. A lot of times she couldn't do it. So I had a lot of freedom, which a lot of people may say, oh, that's a good thing. But at a very early age of 7, 8, 10, 12 years old, sometimes you really need your mom. Not sometimes, a lot of times you really need your mother, especially if your father's working. Who's there to comb your hair? Who's there to, cook your meals? Who's there to do your laundry? So I ended up becoming very independent at a very early age, not by choice, but more so by force, because I had to, because she didn't feel like doing it, not because she didn't want to, but because her clinical depression would not allow her to.
So would you say, like, was that a good thing for you to become that independent? Not that, that your mom, say, because we don't wish that on anybody. But do you think that helped you, to get to where you are now because you were so independent at an early age? But in the same sense, you being like in the mental health field, like, do you feel like, but there still was parts of me that was missing something? So
Yeah.
do you, yeah.
Yeah, most
So
certainly. I think that when we go through challenges, regardless of whether it's a child or as an adult, it impacts us quite naturally. But when we go through traumatic experiences such as this as a child, and, I'm very transparent about what I went through, because I want to be able to utilize, and that's what I've done for the past 10, 12 years or more, is to be able to use my story and to tell my story to empower and to educate others, whether that's parents, whether that's children who are going through something similar to this, whether it's the teacher in the classroom or the school counselor, whether it's the pastor at the church, whether it's the neighbor across the street. We have to realize that we don't know what's going on with people, right? They may present one way, they tell us one thing, but you don't know what's going on in somebody's household. So you have to be mindful of the way in which you deal with people and give people grace and understand that we're all going through something. A long time ago, someone said to me, and it made so much sense. We are either in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of a traumatic experience, or perhaps we just got through a traumatic experience just recently or some years ago, or we are preparing without, a lot of times without even knowing it, to be going through something really soon. So either we're in it, we went through it, or we're about to go through it. That's what we call life. And so for me, yes, it was trauma. I didn't realize it was trauma because it was my norm. But it wasn't until I got older that I realized, through therapy, through dealing with other people, that it is not quite normal. It's traumatic. It's dysfunction. It is not getting the help and the treatment that you need. And so, yes, it was happening to my mother, but it was happening to all of us, because you can't have something that's happening in a family where only one person is affected by it. It impacted all of us. And the way that it impacted me, we call it adverse childhood experiences. You may hear it called ACEs. A lot of times children experience ACE, right? Adverse childhood experiences of one sort of another. And for me, this is what it looked like for me, because even though my mother was present, essentially I was dealing with abandonment. And so, when you say that, it's not like she left. It's not like she left me unattended, or she dropped me off somewhere, didn't come back and get me. She literally was in the home struggling with a mental illness that she did not realize she even had, struggling, trying to be the most effective and the most productive and the most loving mother that she could possibly be. And so that is why I say it wasn't by choice that I was independent. It was by force, because this is something that we all had to deal with, not even knowing that's what we were dealing with. And so to go back to how it impacted me, the independence, I don't look at anything as, I don't know, this is the way I look at life. I don't look at anything as a negative, because I trust God. And so that's why I say in the beginning, I'm a child of God. I don't feel that, again, this is me. I don't feel that anything that I've gone through has been a mistake. I don't feel that anything I've gone through is just by circumstance. It was there to make me the woman that I am today. If I had not been the independent person to be able to not only take care of myself and to take care of my mother, I think back like what would have happened to her had I not been able to do that. Had I not been able to be independent and, delved into education and had this love for learning, I probably would not be Dr. Sheila Williams. So I had this drive to make something positive out of a not so positive situation and circumstance. So, had I not had those experiences, I would not have entered into the field of mental health and psychology. So, I don't think that God makes any mistakes. It's how we deal with the challenges of life. I'm not saying we don't have challenges. I'm not saying that we don't go through stuff. We all do. It looks different for you than it does for me. It looks different from someone else that's listening or watching this. It looks different for each and every last one of us, whether you're going through a divorce, whether you went through a bankruptcy, whether you experienced something as a veteran, whether you have been homeless or you lost your home to foreclosure or you lost your job, whatever it is, those experiences, we can look at them. And again, it may sound like an easy thing to do, because trust me, it's not. But we can look at those experiences and, say, okay, this is the glass half empty, or is it the glass half full? And so I think that we have to have a choice. There is a choice on how we look at things and how we deal with things. And so for me, I have chosen, and it's not just, obviously we're talking about my experiences as a child with a mother who had mental illness, but there are so many other things that have happened to me throughout my life. Again, that divorce, okay, I could be bitter, I could be angry, but I don't look at it that way. I don't see it as a mistake. I don't see it as this is going to ruin the rest of my life. It was a learning experience. And so what can I do from that learning experience? I can talk about it. I can grow from it. I can go to therapy and deal with any baggage or issues that I had from that. And hopefully my experience can be of help to the next person, so that when they're going through this, they realize that they're not the only person that's dealing with it. So I intentionally believe that it is of not of mistake, not of just circumstance. What we have, the experiences that we have. I believe that the life that we live, the life that I'm living, is not about me. It's about what I can do to pay it forward to the next person.
And so, what would you say to like a young person, like maybe who grew up in a household like yours? Like you said, like a lot of times I won't even we can say the African American community, but it's in multiple communities where certain things just aren't said, right? What would you say to a kid who was like dealing with the situation like yours? Like, how would you tell them to get through that, and how would you tell them to like maybe they notice it in their own parent? How would you tell them to kind of work through that situation?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, mental health, mental illness is real. It looks different depending on the diagnosis, depending on the environment, depending on the individual. So you may have three people lined up that have the diagnosis of clinical depression, but it's going to show up. It could possibly show up very different in all three people, because, again, our support systems are different. Our belief systems are different. The way in which we interact and socialize is different. And so, again, that's the reason why I think it's very important that we're not judgmental of one another and we give each other some grace. And so, when I think about children, I worked for a very long time as a teacher, as an assistant principal, as a school counselor in the public school system. And I worked with a lot of children that I was well aware that one or more individuals in the home were dealing with some form of mental illness. And so it is challenging for the child because obviously the child is depending upon their parent or parents to care for them. And a lot of times, because of the parent's mental illness, because of maybe even lack of an appropriate diagnosis, sometimes, individuals are on medication and they're not taking the medication. The children are impacted. And so, my message to a child or any children that are experiencing something like that in their home is to find an aunt or an uncle, a grandparent, maybe even a school counselor that you would feel comfortable enough to talk to. Maybe it's someone in your church, maybe it's a family member or a friend. But you want to be able to find someone that you can truly trust. And I say that in 2025, when you're talking about children, they're very vulnerable. So what you don't want to do is, for your child to put their trust in someone who's going to misuse that trust or abuse it. But if the child is able to, speak to their counselor, speak to the pastor or minister at their church, speak to a big brother, big sister. When I say big brother, big sister, I mean within the community, that aunt, that uncle, the grandparent, someone that's going to be able to step in and be a bridge where either the mother or the father cannot do that for the child. They have someone there that can do that. And so for me, even though my mother suffered from clinical depression, my dad worked a lot, but he was there. When I say he was there, he was home every night, right? And so if and or when I did need him, I was able to go to my father to say, hey, this is, what I'm kind of dealing with here. And so by him knowing, we didn't know what was going on with my mother as far as her diagnosis at the time. As a kid, we didn't know. We were able to communicate. And I had a very close relationship with my father. So he stood in the gap where my mother could not always be there. Of course, he wasn't combing my hair. He wasn't doing any of that. I had to do it myself. But where he could stand in the gap, he was able to do that. I also had a mentor, a very beautiful woman in high school that Miss Davis was her name. And so Miss Davis is her name. And she was absolutely amazing and very instrumental in encouraging me to go to college. So I had quite a few people who stood in the gap throughout my childhood and my early adult years where my mother was not actually able to do that because of her depression. So I would encourage any child or any any children who may be looking at this to find someone that you truly can trust, that you can have as a mentor, someone that you can talk to, and someone that you can confide in. Because again, it's not your fault that you are dealing with this, and again, it's more prevalent than you know, and we a lot of times don't talk about it. A lot of times we don't know about it, but it may be happening in the house next door, or the house across the street, or other classmates in your classroom may be dealing with the same thing, and you just don't know it because they don't talk about it.
Yeah, that's true. And you said something that is very important. So, to the people who don't think fathers are important, this is why fathers are important,
Yes.
because it is something that right now it seems to be accepted in our culture that fathers are not in the home. And this is why it's important to have both parents, not just,
Yeah.
not just mother, but both parents
Yeah.
in the home. Just go on with everything you dealt with. So then you finally decided that you were going to break the silence and you wrote this memoir. All right, My Mother's Keeper.
Yes.
All right, so tell us, how did you get to the point to you like, you know what? All right, so I don't know if you had already started talking about it, but you finally decided like, man, this is something that I need to put on paper. I need to share. All right, how did you get to that point?
Well, it was a long journey to get there. I had no intention of ever writing a book. That was not on my radar at all. And so, again, I don't want to date myself here, but like I said, in my mid 20s, my mother got her diagnosis. I had just finished my bachelor's degree, maybe a couple of years before that, a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I had started my master's degree in counseling psychology. And it was just timing, God's timing, that I'm realizing when I'm looking at her in hindsight 2020. Like, I'm reading in this book and I'm like, a lot of these symptoms and stuff is what I'm looking at in my mom. So, a lot of times I was the one who, if it wasn't my father, it was me who was taking her back and forth to the doctor. And so I'm sitting in doctor's office, primary care, family doctor's office, and he literally says, Miss Williams, I don't think this is a physical ailment. I've been treating you all these years for your physical symptoms. I really don't think that it's a physical ailment. And so he asked her, some of those like emotional questions that they ask now when you go to the primary care. How do you feel? Do you have hope? Do you have someone that cares about you? Those type of things. And so the way in which she responded, that's why he said, I'm going to refer you to a psychiatrist. And so at the point where he referred her, I then took her to the psychiatrist. And that's when she was diagnosed with clinical depression. And so from there, I was sworn to secrecy. I was, basically, again, what happens in the family stays in the family. And what we're not going to talk about is that I have got this diagnosis from a psychiatrist. We're not going to talk about that. And so literally, we didn't talk about it. She took medication. We took her to the doctor she would go to her psychiatrist, for her checkups or whatever, but we never spoke of it. And so it was not my place to tell anybody that, because that's not my business. If she wants to let anybody know that she's suffering from clinical depression, that would have been her choice to do so. And so I don't think she ever, well, I know for a fact, she never told my siblings. And because I was sworn to secrecy, I never told them. I never told anybody because it was not my place to do so. But with that, there's this like heavy weight, there's this burden that you want to tell. Obviously, you want to tell your siblings, you want to tell your aunts, your uncles, you want to tell the other kids in the neighborhood. This is why, when we were growing up, my mom didn't participate. This is why, because now we have the diagnosis and now we have a true understanding of why her behaviors were what they were. But again, I was sworn to secrecy. So you're talking about when I was in my early 20s, all the way through. Eventually, my mother was also diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so her, fight with clinical depression and her fight with multiple sclerosis, which is a very debilitating disorder for a lot of people who are diagnosed with it. It was very debilitating for her, which ended up, causing her to be disabled, and bedridden from the neck down. She couldn't move, and so caring for her. That is how the title of the book became My Mother's Keeper. It wasn't that I thought of writing a book. I simply wanted to tell her story. And it was a couple of years before she passed away that I was, in the room taking care of her, and she was like, "Let me talk to you. What's going on?" And I said to her, we would have these long conversations when she did want to talk. A lot of times she didn't want to talk at all. But when she did want to talk, I stopped immediately what I'm doing and let's talk about it. And so I laid next to her again. She was bedridden. I laid next to her for hours and we just talked and we just talked and we talked. And so I said, Mom, you have a story. You have a story, but because she had this depression and she had a lot of traumatic things that she had experienced, to this day, I don't know what they all were, but she had some things that she had experienced. She alluded to some of those. I write about it in the book, but she had some things that she kept as a secret. But her whole experience with the clinical depression, her whole experience with the multiple sclerosis, her experience as a mother, as a wife, as a child of God, I just felt that she was such a beautiful person, such a strong person, that her story should be told. And there's this misconception that she didn't want friends. There's this misconception that she didn't want to engage with other people. And so I'm having this conversation with my mother, and I clearly realize that she's not going to be here much longer. And so I'm having this conversation with her, and it's very emotional. And I say to her, I want to tell your story. I had no idea what that looked like, but God had laid it on my heart that I needed to tell her story. And so I said that to her and she said, ma'am. And still at that point, bedridden and realizing that she's fighting, this battle with a terminal illness, she said no. And then probably about a year later, 9 months to a year later, we're talking again. Now, mind you, we had talked multiple times in between then, but finally she said to me, I want you to tell my story. And I said, okay. And it took me by surprise because I didn't think she would ever say that. And so I said, okay, are you sure? And she said, yeah, you tell it however you want to tell it because you already know. And I said, okay. And she said, but you can't tell it until I'm gone. And so I waited until, obviously, until my mother had passed. And then it was 2 years after she had passed that I finally wrote the book.
And so why did you think it was so taboo for people to talk about it? Because as you said, like it happens more than we would like. And did we ever really get to the root cause of why, like the clinical depression? And can you explain that when you say clinical depression, why she was that way? Because like you said, it's like it's not like she didn't want friends. It's not like she didn't want to spend time with her kids. It's not like she didn't want to, you guys to have a good life. It just were things that she was dealing with that she didn't even understand at the time. So can you kind of explain that a little bit?
Well, clinical depression is just one of the many mental illnesses that are out there. I mean, some people suffer from PTSD because of traumatic experiences. Some people suffer from anxiety. Some people have bipolar disorder. I mean, you name it. Some people are schizophrenic. There's a million of them in the DSM. So when it, as it pertains to clinical depression, as I stated, you can have 3 or 4 people lined up and they all have the same diagnosis, but it could look very different for every single person. There are some commonalities, but it can be very different depending on, again, your environment, your age, your gender, your supports, your history, and whether or not you have some other stuff going on as well. And so the way that it presented itself with my mother was that she had a very solemn, very kind of affect, kind of solemn mood at pretty much most of the time. Not all the time, because sometimes she was very bubbly and outgoing, but the majority of the time, this depression is this overwhelming. It's not what we consider sad. We all get sad here and there, but an overwhelming sense of depression where you feel that there is a loss of hope, perhaps. You have a lack of interest in social activities, maybe very few friends as she did. And then it showed up for her as physical ailments, like it literally hurt. Her body hurt. And it's not like she made this stuff up. She was literally in pain. And so she had lack of energy. She had lack of interest in activities. And so that's what it looked like. She didn't want a lot of noise in the house. She didn't want the bright lights and the sunlight coming in. She felt most comfortable being in bed, again, because she was in physical pain. This is how it manifested itself for her. And so, again, it can be very different depending on the individual. So I don't want to put a blanket over, someone else could be looking at this right now and says, I have clinical depression and I don't have any of that. And that might be true. But the way that it showed up for my mother is the way that I'm, explaining it to you. And so when it comes to mental illness, again, that requires a professional to be able to diagnose that. I really don't like to see when, I'm looking on social media and I see where people say, you're OCD or, you got PTSD. We sometimes just throw this stuff out. And there are people who are out here really dealing with diagnoses that are accurate and have been diagnosed by professionals with these disorders. It's very light, and I feel like it's very irresponsible when we do that. I think we need to take mental illness a bit more serious. I think also in the African American community, it has been so taboo for so long that, there's this stigma. But I am very happy over the past like 20 years or so, we are pulling back that stigma that is upon mental illness. We're talking about it more. More of Black and Brown communities are going to get help. We are seeking therapy, and we're talking about the fact that something's not quite right with me. I don't participate in activities like I used to. I don't feel good, or I experienced some trauma when I was a kid. I'm still not over my divorce, and it's really affecting and impacting my ability to move on and have a healthy relationship with somebody else. It may not actually be a mental illness, but maybe you need to talk to somebody who is unbiased and who can work through some of these traumas that you have experienced. So I think if we can just think about it that way and know that at any given time, life is lifing. And so if we can take the opportunity to work through anything that causes us not to be able to appropriately function, from day to day, or something that's constantly kind of weighing on you, whether it's, again, it could be a bankruptcy, it could be anything. Talk about it. It could be your children are experiencing something and it's impacting you as a parent. It could be you who's caring for a loved one and it's a bit overwhelming because now you're caring for a parent who used to care for you. And so a lot of people in my age right now are caring for elderly parents, and it can be very taxing. So there's so many things that people are going through that I think a lot of times we don't realize it. We don't talk about it enough. We don't realize that we're not the only one who's dealing with this. So again, it may not necessarily be a mental illness, but maybe it's just something, a stressor in life that you could benefit from speaking to someone. And that's what therapists are there for.
And so, with that, you have worn so many hats. Like, so you have been a therapist, you've been an educator. So I can clearly see your passion and your drive for what you do. So, what do you think has kept that, like, to be like at the forefront of like, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this the hill I am choosing to die on. What do you think like has kept that going throughout this time?
Two things. I think, well, a few things. I think that my love for life, my love for people, again, I don't feel that any of us are here just for us. When I say that, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't work to accomplish things. Obviously, I really believe that. I'm always in a training, got the highest degree possible. But at the same time, as we're doing these things and we're accomplishing these things, what are you doing to help your neighbor? What are you doing to help your community? What are you doing to reach out and uplift someone else or to share this knowledge that you have gained? So I think that, again, this is just my perspective on it. I think that for me, what has kept me on this hill, and the hill that I'm going to die on, is one that God doesn't make any mistakes. I feel that it was very purposeful that He put me in a household that my mother had clinical depression. He made me change my major from being a math major to being a psychology major and going into the field of psychology and counseling. I have a love for education, and so my doctorate degree is in education and leadership. And so my ability to be able to use these traumatic experiences, my ability to use these wonderful positive experiences, accolades, education, and experiences that I've had to uplift other people, to empower other people, to provide knowledge and education to other people. That's my legacy. And so it's not the cars that we drive or the houses that we live in. Yeah, that's great. But when you have the ability to impact a child, or you have the ability to impact someone who perhaps is going through something, to be able to share a positive word, to be able to lend a hand to somebody that's in need, to me, that's what life is all about.
So, is that where your like consulting services come from? Just because of that passion and being able to give back? Can you tell us how like that began and how you started that and what is your mission and your goal?
Yeah, yeah. So, through my business, of course, I am a mental health advocate. Obviously, I'm speaking about that quite a bit here on your show. So, the mental health advocacy is about not only education, but it's also about reform as it pertains to mental health. And so, when I say reform, it is to work to remove that stigma that's associated with mental illness. Through education, training, I partner with NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, to provide trainings and workshops and seminars. I do speeches. And through those speeches, those conferences, those workshops, again, we're educating individuals about getting the help that they need and how to obtain those resources, where to go. The reform piece is not only about removing the stigma that's associated with getting the help that we need, but it's also about ensuring that we have access to mental health services in communities sometimes that are disenfranchised, in communities where there may not be a community mental health agency. So if you are in a city or in a county where mental health services are not readily available, there are other ways to ensure that you get mental health services. So because there are 800 numbers, there are resources that are online now. That's one positive thing that really came out of COVID. There is so many different ways that you can access mental health care and mental health treatment other than physically going to a building or physically going to an office. So through my business, I provide all of those services. Again, as a speaker, as a trainer, as a coach, as a mental health advocate. Now, with the speeches, obviously, it's not all geared towards mental health awareness. Most of it is. But I also do commencement speeches and other speeches as well as a John Maxwell certified speaker, trainer, and coach.
And so when you're up there speaking, right? So are you thinking about like are you looking at people and like can you feel or can you see like man they really resonate with what I'm saying as far as like the mental health side? Because you're right. Like I've always said like we don't talk about like mental health enough. Even when I post like stuff about leadership, but I always like try to every couple months make sure I throw something in there about mental health because I'm a happy, bubbly person. But even I go through things and sometimes I don't realize what I'm going through. So when you're giving speeches, can you kind of see like, all right, man, maybe I should talk to this person after like can you see all those things going on?
I mean, I'm a happy, bubbly person too. I'm very outgoing, but then at the same time, I like to have my privacy and my downtime too. But I am generally a very outgoing person. I enjoy interacting with people, and so what has happened is usually when I'm doing a speech or a workshop or conference or something about mental illness, or just trying to encourage people to put mental health at the top of their list, just like you want to make sure you don't get diabetes, and if you do have diabetes, you want to keep it under control. You make sure we're exercising and eating right and making sure we're not having high blood pressure. Just like you do that, you can get a mental health checkup. So when I tell people that, they're like, huh? You literally can. And so you go for a physical checkup, you can get a mental health checkup as well. So when I'm doing speeches, typically, obviously I'm hired to do whatever it is that the speech is about. But if it's about mental health awareness or whatever, yeah, I like to connect with the people in the audience, but usually the topic at hand is whatever it is. And what happens is I oftentimes have individuals come up to me after I've spoken or after the workshop and connect with me and want to know more about my story. You would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, that people will be very transparent and they will tell you things. I've had people tell me things that they've never told anybody before, and I'm a complete stranger. But they realize that if I can tell my story and I put my business out here for the world, then it's a safe space. I'm a therapist, so I'm bound by confidentiality. But yeah, it's a good feeling to know that what I'm doing is impacting people. I've had individuals who are secretly dealing with drug related issues that no one knows about. They go to work every single day, they take care of their family every day, but they're taking some type of drug or some kind of narcotic every single day in order to function. A lot of times, those individuals let me know that they're masking their pain because of some traumatic experience that they have had gone through in the past. And so, again, those traumatic experiences could be some form of abuse or neglect or something that may have happened to them or something that they've witnessed that they were sworn to secrecy that they could never tell. And so it's things like that that really give me a stamp of approval. It's difficult to hear those conversations. It's difficult to have those conversations, but I know that I'm doing what God has purpose for my life. And because a lot of people don't want to do this, it's a difficult field to be in, but at the same time, it's very rewarding.
And that's why it's important that we share our story and that, like you said, we talk to somebody, like you said before. Like if you're a kid, like you talk to like if it's a family member that you trust, that you feel like you can talk to, if you have the ability to go get counseling or to see somebody who is in the mental health field, then it's important for you to talk to that person as well. And so with that, you have this mental health that seemed to shape your life, right? What would you say is the biggest thing like you've gotten out of this journey that you've gone on, seeing your mother go through it, and now your life purpose of you doing it? How has been the biggest thing that has shaped you in that journey?
It's just all of it together. I mean, when I look back over my life, I'm immensely blessed. And I just thank God for all of my experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, right? And so for me, it's just about being transparent and being authentic. I think a lot of times we have people who are living this facade. And it's so liberating to be able to live authentically and to be like, okay, either you like me or you don't, you love me or you don't, and I am who I am. And so I think if we can be very authentic about who we are, we will realize that we're more alike than we are different. We have more similarities, perhaps about some of the experiences that we've gone through, or maybe not the experiences that we've gone through, but the way in which it has impacted our lives. And so when we hold things in, not that you have to write a book or come on a podcast and tell all your business, but you want to be able to have a release of anything that you've been carrying or anything that you're currently going through. Got to have somebody that you can talk to. And this is why I say it's a safe space to find a good therapist, someone that is qualified to talk to you about whatever it is that you're experiencing or have experienced in the past. It's a beautiful thing. Someone who is unbiased. Sometimes when we tell our good girlfriend, or you tell your homeboy, or you're talking about it in the barbershop or the beauty salon, or a cousin, these are people who love you. These are people who are aware of whoever this is you have presented to them, but you may not be completely authentic with them because you don't want them to look at you a different way. You don't want them to know that perhaps have had certain things happen to you or certain things you've gone through. You may not want to be completely transparent with them. And then if you are, will they judge you? Is the question. And so that's, you would hope not, but of course they're going to be a little bit biased because they love you, right? And so with that, again, they're not licensed, they're not qualified as therapists to be able to give you advice or to give you a diagnosis if you have one, to be able to give you those strategies to help you through whatever you're going through. This is why therapy is always encouraged and recommended for everybody. And so I think part of the stigma of, I don't know, I don't really know what the hesitation is because I've been in and out of therapy all my life. So I don't really know why everybody has their own reason why they may or may not want to go to therapy. I've heard all kinds of things. Like, I don't want to tell a stranger my
I can tell you
business.
why.
Well,
I can tell you why.
you tell me why.
I can honestly tell you why.
Tell me
It's
why.
because it's just like, you look on like Facebook, you look on Instagram, you look on TikTok. People always show you the highlights of their life.
Oh, yeah.
Like you never see like so when me meeting you, I only see Dr. Sheila D. Williams.
Yes.
I never experienced the young kid that's going through all the emotional stuff that you go through when you're young, that you were going through. And so when I show you that I'm not perfect, I have to be able to show that I'm vulnerable. And I think that's a lot of times what people are afraid to do is show people that, okay, I'm not perfect. My life is not perfect and I'm vulnerable. And that's the part that's scary because when you have to show somebody that's vulnerable, that you're vulnerable, especially if you're not talking to, like you said, a therapist or somebody who's bound by now, like, is that person really gonna, like, are they gonna take advantage of that they have this information? Or can I really trust somebody with that? And it can be even people that you trust. It could be somebody who was married
Right.
and still haven't told their spouse about things that they're going through, and they won't tell their spouse. Like you said, your mother was going through the things that she was going through, and I guarantee you there were things she never told your father
Yeah.
about, even though, that was the person that she loves. Like she loved that
Mhm.
person. But sometimes it's still like, I know I trust you, but can I trust you with
With
this?
this. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and because it shows a lot. Because even when and not to talk about my story because we're on here to talk about you. It took me, like, me and my wife have been together a few years, like, I'm talking about over a decade before I told her what happened to me as a
Right.
young kid being assaulted, molested, by one of my older cousins, and how it affected me with certain things, like, physically with us. So it took, like, and that was years. I done been with you this long, and it took me that long
Right.
to tell you, like, "Yeah, okay, well, this is why I'm that way," right? Because it shows that vulnerability. And I share this because, like, for the people who are listening, right, like, I understand that you're gonna be vulnerable because I'm all about what Dr. Sheila is talking about. I understand that you're gonna be vulnerable, but the more you tell that story, it empowers you. And so that, like they tell you, like that you turn your pain into to your purpose. You turn your pain into your power.
Yes.
So the more you get to talk about it, now you're able to release a lot of things that are holding you back from what's going to eventually make you great.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
with that being said,
Yes. Yes. I
so I
totally
went
agree
on,
with you.
yeah, I went on a little rant there. I went on a little
No, I
rant there.
love
My
it.
bad. All right, so I'm gonna come back. With that being said, with everything that you're doing, like the stuff you do with your book, you're speaking, constantly educating people. What is the last thing, like legacy and impact, you want to leave on this earth when you are gone? Let's say 50 years from now. That gets you. I know you don't never ask a woman her age, but hopefully that gets you close to 100. Right? That gets you close to
Yeah,
100.
I'll only be 49 at that point. You said give me 50, I'll be 49.
I'm gonna give you 50 more years. Oh,
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'll be long gone by then.
well, so hopefully, that gets you a few years because we want you to keep making an impact. But what is the lasting impact and legacy that you want to leave on this earth?
I would hope that people would say, she was a good person. She was true to who she authentically was. She was transparent. She had a heart and a love for life and a heart and a love for people. She used her I'm speaking of myself in third person, that I used, that she used, that Dr. Sheila used her life, her experiences, her traumas, as well as her triumphs to empower other people, to educate other people, ensure and to, I wouldn't say necessarily to ensure, but to work towards removing the stigma associated with mental illness. And so for that, I would say I would want that to be my legacy, that I had a good heart, that I lived very transparently and true to who I am, and that I use all of the education, the knowledge, the experience, the trials, and the triumphs to help uplift and encourage, motivate, and educate others.
All right. Thank you for what you do
Thank
because it is
you.
very important work. And I know sometimes it can be hard because like you're taking in, like I'm an energy person, like so I feel like I'm taking in like everything that this person is telling me. And if you
Yes,
got a real heart for people, it's hard to not have a heavy heart for some of the stuff that people are going through.
yes.
So thank you for all that you do and the people that you continue to help. So for the people who want to stay in contact with you, and can you tell them how they can connect with you? And you can tell them how can they find your book as well.
Okay, for sure. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me as a guest. And so probably the fastest way to find me is my full name, Dr. Sheila D. Williams. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, it's going to be my full name, Dr. Sheila D. Williams. My website is drsheila.dwilliams.com. I have a YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Please find me on IG. Please find me on LinkedIn. Please find me on Facebook. Dr. Sheila D. Williams. And of course, if you want to purchase the book is My Mother's Keeper. It's pretty much available everywhere. If you go to walmart.com, it's there. Type in My Mother's Keeper or type in my full name. It's there. It's on Amazon, My Mother's Keeper. And again, it's pretty much available anywhere that books are sold. But the fastest way probably to get it is to just go to amazon.com and type in my full name or type in My Mother's Keeper.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that information. And man, y'all make sure y'all go check out Dr. Sheila D. Don't forget the D. I William. All right, make sure you check her out
Yeah.
because I think I forgot the D in the email, and maybe that's why you
And
didn't
that's where
get.
you get that from. That's why you said don't forget the D. I was like, what is he saying?
Don't forget the D, right? Don't
I
forget the
love
D.
it.
And so, as we come to a close, is there any lasting words that you want to leave with the audience?
Yeah, I just want you to love yourselves and to love life and to live very transparently. And in doing that, if for whatever reason you or someone that you know is in a crisis, I want you to remember three numbers, 988. If and or when you or a loved one is experiencing any type of mental health crisis, or you just need to talk to somebody, you can just pick up the phone, text, and or call 988 for mental health assistance. And I just want to thank you again for having me here. It's been a pleasure, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. So thank you to Dr. Sheila. And as always, to my audience, you are whatever you say you are. If you believe, therefore you are. And you are great. And your greatness doesn't need anybody else's approval. Hey, y'all have a good one. Peace.